Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of World Builders Nexus. Today, we are going to be continuing our talk about Solomism, talking about the history, some of the interpretations, and just generally how it has affected society throughout its existence. Remember that if you like what you see, to leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more. But without further ado, let's get into it. To give a brief recap of last week's episode, we talked about the beliefs of Solomism as well as what the Archmagistars teach. We talked about Archmagistar Soros, who is our introduction to Solomism in the town of Oxgard. If you want to see more about all of this, I'd recommend watching last week's video. But yeah, this week we are talking about the history of Solomism, how it started and how it got to become what it is today, as well as House Hastur and King Solomon himself. So Solomism begins sort of with King Solomon's second expedition north. So when he did that, he took 39 of the 40 Archmagistars of the Temple of Solomon, and he began his expedition north. They were looking for the secrets of Yarrow and Yarism and the secrets of immortality and all of that stuff. However, he never returned home, and the capital city of Elise stopped receiving word, and so his son Abram took the throne, assuming that his father was dead. Meanwhile, in the city of Phalcis, King Solomon's other son, Cain, believed that he was the rightful king, and so he, marched out of Phalcis, and there was a civil war that would last for 4 years between Abram and Cain, resulting in the complete collapse of House Hastur and the extinction of the family. But in the meantime, the last Archmagistar that was left at the Temple of Solomon, when King Solomon took his Archmagistars, there was one left. His name was Markham Harrell, and he wrote the Tome of Solomon in the year 2 ASR, and that's sort of what I would consider the birth of Solomism. For the first 75 to 100 years, Solomism did see a lot of early adopters, especially in the Riverlands, and the people who were adopting Solomism very early on were either the people who were devout followers politically, as well as just people who empathized with his life as written in the Tome of Solomon, because the Tome of Solomon is fictitious in a sense, like it's based on real history, but it's sort of written in a way that is kind of fictitious. It hyperbolizes things, and it writes things maybe not exactly how they happened. However, the obscurity of Solomism would cease when King Yofric Myrel would take the throne, becoming the first king of Western Eratsael to openly follow Solomism. While he was immediately met with hostility by the people because of this, weird new religion, he did a great job of leading the people, leading the kingdoms during the Winter Blight. I haven't written the Winter Blight yet, but for the purposes of this conversation, it was a 7-year apocalyptic winter that was caused when a very powerful necromancer cast a high-level blizzard spell. Just so y'all know, this is all taking place about 180 years after the Tome of Solomon was written. This was 184 after Solomon's reign when King Yofric Myrel took the throne. The next and final major event for Solomism is the sectarian revolts. These were a series of revolts all over Western Eratsael and all 4 kingdoms. In the year 2181, after Solomon's reign, the Archmagistars, who were at the Temple of Solomon, they penned a new edition for Solomism. And that was kind of the first time something like that had happened since Markham Harrell wrote the book. The amendment dictated tithes at congregation, basically church, and this was obviously met with a lot of disdain amongst large populations of Solomites. The sectarians were a group of people that were revolted from the Archmagistars. They considered them more of a tyrannical government than a group of wise scholars. The most notable event during these revolts was at the Steps of the First Men, where over 1,200 Solomites burnt down the second congregation of King Solomon, which was a massive church in the city. The revolts ended in 2185 after Solomon's reign, when the rebelling Solomites founded the sectarian interpretations. It was a massive schism in the Church of Solomism. As far as the interpretations for Solomism go, there are three main factions. You've got the traditionalists, the sectarians, and then the northerners who follow Solomism. And they each have their own very distinct way of worshiping. So the traditionalists are very strict followers of the Tome of Solomon. They follow it very literally. And they also consider the Archmagistars to be the lawmakers of the land. They are the final authority of King Solomon himself. They speak in his behalf, and they very much respect the Archmagistars. In stark contrast, the sectarians believe in a personal worship and more relaxed laws and customs. And they are the group that broke away from the traditional teachings during the sectarian revolts. The sectarians believe very much in religion and belief being a personal endeavor that nobody can infringe upon. They see the Archmagistars as more of a, like I said, a tyrannical government than a coalition of wise scholars, largely completely disregarding any declarations, announcements, or new rules or laws that are put forth by the Archmagistars. Lastly, I want to talk about Solomism in the North, because I know I haven't talked a whole lot about the North, but the culture there is very different from the rest of Western Eratsael. So underneath the North is a large series of caverns, very similar to the Underdark in the Forgotten Realms, but it's called the Undernorth, or the North Below. And that's where the dwarves live. A lot of giants live down there. Furbolgs live down there. A lot of races live down there. Races you would typically associate with the Underdark. And they don't really respect King Solomon. They see him more as like a prophet, but even then, it's just to appease the humans that are in power in the West. The dwarves have their own pantheon with very similar to it's basically pulled from Norse mythology in the real world, with Odin and Thor and Loki and all those people. That's what I'm going to base the northern mythology on. So, like I said, they only really worship King Solomon to appease the humans in power and don't really respect him that much. So with that, I think we are more or less done talking about Solomism for right now. I think there's going to be more writing I'll do on it, but for now I'm going to wrap it up and move on, and I would like to talk about House Hastur. So House Hastur was the family that King Solomon belonged to, and I want to kind of go through their history and their sort of culture as I have it so far. It's going to be hard to talk about House Hastur without talking about what the political climate of this time period was like. So up until Hastur's conquer of Western Eratsael, there were several different kingdoms within it. House Hurst had their kingdom in the eastern part of the north. Hastur would develop theirs in the west. You had, a house in the central part of the Riverlands, two houses on either side. Like, there were a lot more kingdoms within this, and so there were several kings and lords who all were fighting for their own swaths of land. So to begin with the history of House Hastur, they were founded in the year 894 BSR, when Sir Veers Hastur became Lord of Whitefall during a revolt within the city of Whitefall. Soon after, him and his sons led armies across the western region of the north. They took both Kiev and Aleth by the year 888 BSR. Although for the next 80 years, they slowed down on their aggression and were forced to take a more defensive posture, with both outside aggression, especially from House Hurst, but they also were having lots of revolts. But after several decades of fighting off aggression and sieges and whatnot, House Hastur grew in influence across the west and became quite the powerhouse in the Western Eratsael. So later on in the year 685 BSR, using the influence that House Hastur had garnered over the years, Lord Doderic Hastur of Whitefall called upon all of the kings and queens of Western Eratsael to convene and discuss a treaties of peace between all of the kingdoms of Western Eratsael. He was fed up with all the constant wars that were crippling the cities and the economies of the West, and, but he was denied his claim to a meeting, largely due to a war between the houses of Aaroncaster and Dirk, who were in the Hold and in the Gale, respectively. But later on in the year 661 BSR, Hastur's wishes came true in the city of Elise, where a treaty called the Order of Kings was signed. It declared peace between the kings of Western Eratsael, and the treaty had been upheld by the great houses ever since, though some wars have still been fought between kings and queens. However, the sons, daughters, and grandchildren of Lord Doderic Hastur were not so keen on this peace deal, and after his death they began expanding south into the Riverlands, taking a few cities from House Colchester. The region is nowadays called the Knots, after House Hastur. They fought several wars against House Colchester, but House Hastur failed to take anything beyond the western coast. So to set the tone a bit better for this next section, I want to talk about what the relationship between the East and the West were at the time. As y'all may know, there is a Eastern Eratsael. I have not gone too deep into it, but that's where the elves, the orcs, Leonin, all of them live. And in the West, which is what I want to talk about for now, we'll talk more about the East in the future, but in the West there was this sort of idea forming around one day going east and conquering them and building more kingdoms out east. There are huge swaths of land, and humans always kind of are prideful, and they want to always have more. So yeah, with that, we can now talk about the Knot Treatise. So in the year 471 BSR, Lord Angsar Hastur of Whitefall penned a document called the Knot Treatise, and it was a 71-page series of essays dictating why peace between the East and West was crucial for a better world generally. It was a reaction to these Western calls for war against the East, and the treatise was a huge success, and it served as a catalyst for peace for over 400 years, and is a large reason why there was never war between the East and West. So House Hastur would finally become a great house in the year 113 BSR, when Sir Kenton Hastur of Whitefall conquered the Riverlands from House Colchester entirely in what is now called the Little Knots War. Kenton Hastur was known as the Little Knot due to his small stature. The final battle took place at Elise, with Kenton Hastur sending specialized soldiers to disguise themselves as royal guard within the city. They killed Lord Colchester while he was using the restroom, as a matter of fact, and Kenton proceeded to take the city, and he killed all Colchester heirs in the process. Lord Kenton's direct heir was a King Torin Hastur, and he would lead House Hastur and the Riverlands in a war to unite the entirety of Western Eratsael. This war is now called the War of the West, and it was when House Hastur faced the North, the Hold, and the Gale all at the same time. The final battle of the war was between House Hastur and House Hurst. It's now called the Battle of the Eye, and King Torin Hastur was killed at the battle. Well, he was mortally wounded at the battle, but died later on in the city of Elise, I believe. But his son, King Solomon Hastur, finished the battle, and it was hard won, but House Hastur was successful and united the four kingdoms, and that sort of sets the stage for the political situation nowadays. Even though this was 5,000 years ago, politics have largely sort of remained the same. It's still sort of feudal, like a feudal era, but there is now a king, and then each swath of land has a lord instead of their own separate kingdom. Of course, we've already talked about King Solomon Hastur. He would rule from 62 BSR until 0 ASR, when he was presumed dead by his son Abram Hastur. And after the fact, there was a civil war amongst House Hastur. Abram took the throne of Elise, while his brother Cain in Whitefall decided he was the rightful king, and they warred against each other. It ended with the complete collapse of House Hastur, and House Myrel, which nowadays is also an extinct house, they took the throne and would hold it for over 5,000 years, I believe. I mean, it's the longest dynasty in the history of Eratsael. As far as the culture of House Hastur goes, they were obviously a long-lasting house, and culture changes over time, but for the most part, they were known for their tolerance of both war and peace. Their crest was two knots that were intertwined, a symbol of strength and unity. The motto of House Hastur was strength through unity and unity through conquest. Most of the members of House Hastur were followers of a religion called Yarism. I haven't really written it yet, but I do know that it was a common religion at the time. But yeah, that about does it with House Hastur and with the, beliefs and the history of Solomism. This is, like I said in the last video, a backbone of the world. It's very important. The stories I want to tell are going to have a lot to do with this, so I wanted to go ahead and get it outlined and sort of, typed out. And yeah, once again, I hope you all enjoyed. If you did, make sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe for more. Go back and check out some of the other videos. I know that they aren't all the best quality, but they will sort of give you an idea of what I'm doing if you're kind of confused. But yeah,